Hey everyone, it's John Heath here again for MiltonRose Learning with another Let's Learn lesson on the sea and air wars of World War One. So obviously this is from our World War One series. So yeah, hit the water and hit the skies. So we're going to look at the context and the causes of what was driving the sea and air wars in World War One. Then we've got a really good chronology. So we're going to look and give you some really good notes there to go into your books on that. And then we've also got a turning point as well in the sea and air wars, which we're going to tease out for you because history's all about turning points as always. And then we will round off, as always, to look at the significances of the sea and air wars for the greater World War One itself. And we'll look at tertiary significance, secondary significance, and the all-important primary significance. Okay, so let's dive in. So what was driving the sea and air wars of World War One? Well, there's three big factors for me. So the first one that was kind of structuring definitely the naval kind of element of World War One was the British Naval Blockade. So economic strangulation. The Royal Navy was the strongest in the world in World War One, and it established a total blockade of the North Sea that starved Germany over time of food, raw materials and military supplies. And you can kind of see it here, just for the visual learners. That's a kind of the blockade. You're not going to get through that with a merchant seaman. It's just not going to happen. So the Royal Navy was kind of blocking off Germany, and that was very much structuring. It was the grand strategy, I suppose, of British kind of naval kind of policy. And the home front impact that had, the blockade severely eroded German civilian morale over time. It took time, but it did. And it led to widespread food shortages eventually, such as the turnip winter of 1916, which I think we may tease out later on as well. So that was structuring the kind of sea war. Germany's kind of reply or riposte, you might say, to this was unrestricted submarine warfare. So the Germans were very, very good at U-boats, basically submarines. So lacking naval equality, Germany relied on U-boats, which are submarines, to sink Allied merchant shipping and disrupt our trade. Okay, so that's how they fought back, and that was like a back and forth for the majority of the war. And one of the key events, which again I think I might put it in for as a turning point, is the sinking of the Lusitania, as you can see in the image there. That was the loss of 128 American lives aboard a cruise liner, the Lusitania, and it sparked intense diplomatic outrage from the USA, and it started to pull them into the war. Okay, so that was the unrestricted submarine warfare was a real own goal from the German high command there. Okay. And then in the air, what was driving the air war? Well, as you can see from that charming image of a British biplane. Firstly, at least, the reconnaissance revolution in the air. So there was now eye in the sky, eyes over the battlefield. So early aircraft, as you can see in that picture, were used primarily for aerial reconnaissance to get a read on the enemy trench lines, enemy movements, things like that, and also to direct artillery fire. To kind of say, right, you need to fire over there, or there's a weak point in the trenches here. So that was a big thing driving the air war. And the strategic value, aerial photography eliminated battlefield surprises now. So we could tell very quickly where the enemy was massing, where they were going to attack, things like that. So it made surprise infantry offensives now kind of impossible or very, very difficult to actually do, because an aircraft's going to fly over and take pictures of the soldiers massing. So that's some of the context that was driving the sea and air wars in World War One. Let's get a tighter read now with a nice chronology. Okay, and this would be really good for your notes. Really, really good for your notes. So let's have a look then. So 1914 to 15, you have the blockade, as we know, starts to bite into Germany's economy, and the sinking of the Lusitania. So first off, starving Germany. Britain's North Sea blockade cut off German sea imports, and it caused severe domestic food shortages, which you can only survive those for a little bit of time, and then the public will start to kind of mutiny and get very, very anxious. U-boat retaliation, as we learnt, so Germany declares the waters around Britain a war zone and sinks merchant ships on site. Merchant ships are normally fairly defenceless ships that are just bringing in supplies into a country. They're called merchant ships or merchant shipmen. And and the U-boats are starting to sink them to try and starve Britain out. And the Lusitania tragedy in May 1915 then, as we know, U-20 sank the British liner Lusitania, killing 1,198 passengers, but not most importantly, because every life is worth the same, but there were 128 Americans on board there, so that sparked outrage from America especially. And there's one thing we know about world wars: you don't want to irritate America, because if you do and they get involved, you're going to have a hard time winning the war then. So that caused a massive diplomatic incident at sea. Then 31st of May to the 1st of June 1916, we have a very kind of important kind of battle, the Battle of Jutland. Okay, so in the north part of the UK. So this was a clash of dreadnoughts, the only major fleet engagement of the war, which pitted Admiral Jellicoe against Admiral Scheer, just off Denmark, not far from Denmark. So British losses then. The Brits lost 14 ships and 6,000 sailors. That's a lot for a naval war battle. Germany lost 11 ships and 2,500 sailors and claimed a tactical victory. The problem was, as we know, the Royal Navy could afford to replace those ships because it was the biggest navy in the world at this time, with a really good shipbuilding kind of industry. Germany's replacements were very difficult to find. They couldn't replace those as much, so it was more irreplaceable for them. The strategic win, the German High Seas Fleet, though, retreated, and they never directly challenged the Royal Navy's surface dominance again. They got enough of a bloody nose at the Battle of Jutland, so they stayed in port for pretty much the rest of the war. And the RAF technically won that strategic victory, even though the Germans claimed a tactical victory. Okay, then number 3. Let's have a look. So unrestricted submarine warfare then, and the convoy system. So Germany basically gambled. They resumed in 1917. They resumed sinking all neutral merchant shipping to starve Britain before the US Army could deploy. So by 1917, America is involved, and Germany's thinking, we need to end this war. We need to win it before the Americans can land in France. So they unrestricted submarine warfare. They start kind of blowing up merchant ships again to try and starve Britain out. The convoy system, though, was a really good countermeasure. So you can see in the image that is a convoy, where you line up all your merchant ships in the middle, and then around them you put warships to defend them against submarines. So Lloyd George then forced the Royal Navy to group merchant ships together under that warship escort to help them get across the Atlantic Ocean. Okay, it was a very good countermeasure with the convoy system. And the U-boat defeat then, eventually convoy tactics drastically reduced shipping losses from 20% down to under 1%. So by doing that over time, and the tactics got a bit more sophisticated, we eventually defeated the U-boat threat to Britain's supply lines. Okay, and then in the air, as you can see from that image of a Zeppelin over London. So 1915 to 18, so the majority of the war, we have Zeppelin raids and dogfights. So terror from above, basically. So German Zeppelins, these massive airships, as you can see in the image there, launched the first aerial bombings of London in 1915, and it forced air defences to be kind of developed by the UK. Fighter developments as well, so synchronisation gear allowed machine guns to fire through the propellers at like synchronised kind of moments, creating aerial combat aces. Okay, and the fighter plane is born, and then they start kind of fighting in the air. And then in April 1918, the RAF is founded. So Britain merged the RFC and the RNAS to create the Royal Air Force, which is still in operation today. And it was the world's first independent air force. Okay, and away you go. And then Britain started to develop that air arm, okay, which was really, really important in the development of warfare generally. So those are some of the key historical events, but I think the turning point, as you can probably tell, definitely at sea, obviously, was the introduction of the convoy system. So from around about May 1917, we have the convoy system, and here is a naval convoy at sea. You're not messing around with that if you're a German U-boat, are you? It was kind of very, very effective in protecting merchant shipping to get supplies back into Britain. So it neutralised the U-boats, grouping merchant ships with warships. Immediately cut Allied shipping losses. It wasn't like a magic bullet, but it did really help over time, and the U-boats struggled to kind of break through the convoy system. And eventually that saved Britain. It prevented the economic collapse and starvation of Britain in mid-1917, so we could continue the war and ultimately bring it to a victorious conclusion. Okay, so I do think that's a big turning point. Right, now, finally then, as we know as historians, it's all about, that's fine, what was happening in the air and sea in World War One, but what was the significance of that? And we've got tertiary significance, which are the least important, secondary in the middle, and then primary, which to my mind is the most important. So let's have a look. What were the tertiary significant events of the air and sea war in World War One? Well, for me, I think it is the transformation of area warfare. It was the death of battlefield surprise now. So reconnaissance planes eliminated hidden troop movements, making strategic surprise almost impossible without air superiority. If you wanted to maintain secrecy of your attack going over the top, we had to blow all the enemy kind of aircraft out of the sky so they couldn't see you, which is very, very difficult to do. So death of battlefield surprise, I think. Creation of air forces, as we know, institutionalized air forces. So aviation technology from reconnaissance craft to then dedicated fighters, and then even in the image you can see strategic bomber forces even started to get a lot more sophisticated, and that paved the way for air forces as we know them today. So I think those are the tertiary significant events. Secondary significance getting a bit more important now for the war, I think. The US entry into the war. So the U-boat catalyst. So for me, unrestricted submarine warfare and merchant ship sinkings directly provoked America into declaring war in April 1917. They'd had enough. They were just like, you keep sinking our ships and this is it. And so they get involved. I think that's quite a significant event. And the convoy system success, implementing convoy escorts defeated that U-boat threat and secured American transatlantic troop movements. They could get now from America all the way across the Atlantic into France and then on the battlefields of Flanders and start to tilt the war against the Germans. Okay. But what were the most important events, the primary significant events? You can debate this, to be honest. That's the beauty of history. We can debate it all day long. But this is what I believe. The economic strangulation of Germany. It starved their home front. The British blockade cut off German imports, and it led to the severe malnutrition and the turnip winter of 1916 and 17. And you can see a little clip from the turnip winter here. It's grim. You can see the Germans were really struggling for sustenance there. They put turnips into pretty much everything, and they were struggling to survive almost. And ultimately, that would pave the way for German domestic collapse. So civilian starvation directly fueled the anti-war strikes, the naval mutinies at Kiel, and the political revolution of late 1918. It brought the Germans to their knees and ultimately helped us to win World War One. Okay then, so that is a primer lesson really for the sea and air wars of World War One. Hopefully you've enjoyed that and you can jump off now and do your own research to supplement that. As always, don't forget to hit the like, subscribe and tap the bell icon so to never miss another Let's Learn video again. It's been lovely obviously having you watch with us. If you have any kind of comments or anything you want to kind of say, please do just chuck them in the comments box and we'll always do our best to reply. And it just remains to say, obviously, thanks for listening. It's always appreciated. Thanks very much. Take care and we'll see you soon.